There are a variety of manufacturer jigs and some that you can make on your own. They help you cut crown molding on the saw. On the manufacturer jigs, some are metal brackets that come off the front to help you prop up that trim. On the plastic jigs, they work off both the left and the right-hand side that help stabilize that piece. And lastly, we've made them out of plywood that have just a wooden board across the front, again, that helps stabilize that piece of trim. But in all cases, they're taking a trim and they're taking the top edge here and putting that on the bottom and putting the bottom edge up against the fence. In the trades, we call this cutting the trim upside down and backwards. And the problems that always arise are cutting and stabilizing very long pieces, real wide pieces, and finally real small ones. The second method is one that I use. Instead of propping up the trim on the saw, I adjust the angles on the saw and cut that trim flat. And a closer look at the miter saw will show you how easy that is. Now if you take a look at the miter scale, you're going to see a grouping of numbers. Next to 0, 15 degrees, 22.5, and 45 are positive stops called detents. They're set at the normal common angles. But there's another one between 22.5 and 45 that you may not realize what it's there for, 31.6 degrees. In this case, there's a positive stop there too. It may be noted by a positive stop, a thicker line, maybe the mark called CM, but 31.6 degrees is the miter setting for cutting crown molding on your miter saw. Now let's look at the bevel. On the back of the saw, there's a scale. It goes from 0 to 45. So it has a positive stop at 0 and at 45. But if you look between those two values, there's another little mark, in this case a small little arrow, set at 33.9 degrees. 33.9 is the bevel setting for cutting crown molding flat on your saw. The settings of 33.9 on the bevel and 31.6 on the miter are stamped into the saw to eliminate the calculations it would take to cut trim at 90 degrees when it sits away from the wall at 38 degrees. Laying trim flat on the saw also makes it much easier to stabilize long pieces. It's much easier to cut wider pieces that may not be able to stand up in a propped up jig. And lastly, the trim can be clamped here pretty easily, making cutting off small pieces much easier. To make the process of cutting crown molding flat on the miter saw all but mistake-proof, I'm going to show you how to make a set of templates that make positioning really easy. I'll also show you how to use those during the positioning part of this demonstration. Before we do that though, I want to make a couple of checks on the miter saw to make sure that we're plumb and square. Now what you'll need to check plumb and square is a machinist square like this and also a plastic triangle. First thing I want to do is make sure that the blade is at 90 degrees to the table. So to do that, I just take my square and lay it on the table and up against the blade and make sure that I'm 90 degrees, and in this case I am. While the blade is still locked down, I can take my plastic triangle and put it up against the fence and make sure that its 90-degree leg lays even with the blade, and it does. Now if you find your blade is not 90 degrees to the fence, check your owner's manual to find out where the adjustment points are and make those adjustments before you start. All right, now to start, you'll just need a 3-foot piece of crown. I've marked this in the middle already. What I'm going to do is just cut the first piece in half. Now you've got 2 pieces. On one of those pieces, take a magic marker like this and mark the top edge. Now remember, most of the ornamentation on crown molding is normally towards the bottom. So we're going to take a magic marker and just mark the top edge on one piece of crown like this. On the other piece of crown, I'm going to take that same marker, but in this case, mark the crown on the bottom edge. Let's start with the one on the top first. We're going to press that up against the back because the black mark always goes up against the fence. I want to tilt my bevel to 33.9, and I'm going to slide my miter in this case towards me at 31.6. And all I'm going to do now is cut this piece of trim in half. Now, you have no idea what you've just made, but let's set these off to the side and take the other piece of crown and cut it. And remember, this is the one with the black mark on the bottom of the trim. The black mark always goes up against the fence. We're leaving the bevel setting at 33.9, and since we had the miter gauge set on my side last time, we're going to slide it to the other side at 31.6 this time, and we're going to cut that in half. So here's how we do it. And now to mark these. Here are your 4 pieces. Find your 2 outside corners. In this case, this is what we have. This would be our left outside corner. This would be our right outside corner. So let's mark this one first. This would be our left outside corner. And this then, of course, would be our right outside corner. Here's our inside corners. This is the way they'd be sitting on the wall. So in this case, we have our left inside corner, and this is our right inside corner. So let's take the left again and mark left inside corner, and lastly, right inside corner. Now what you've created is a full set of templates. These will help you position your trim on the saw, and will also be used for the installation process. Let me show you how this works. Here's a right inside corner. And if you notice in this case, the mark is on the bottom side of the trim. That always goes up against the fence. My bevel setting stays at 33.9. And in this case, you can see I have to rotate the miter setting to the left side, and there's my cut. And replacing this piece with the new trim set at the same orientation will allow me to cut that trim perfectly. Now let's just say we're going to create a right outside corner. That's marked on the back. Again, mark is on the top edge. That black mark always goes up against the fence. Bevel stays at 33.9. In this case, we have to rotate the trim to 31.6 on this side. You'll notice that that is the correct cut. You should never place your trim on the saw incorrectly.